South Africa. The exact timeline of the first African farmers settling in southern Africa is still a matter of ongoing research and debate among scholars. But some archaeological evidence suggests that these populations began to migrate into the region between 2000 and 1700 years ago. The first African farmers to settle in southern Africa are believed to have come from the Bantu-speaking groups of Central and East Africa. They brought with them a range of agricultural practices, including growing crops such as sorghum, millet, and keeping livestock such as chickens, sheep, cattle, and goats. These early farmers are thought to have slowly spread throughout southern Africa, with different groups settling in different areas over time. Some settled along the coast and established trading networks with Arab and Indian merchants, while others moved inland and established more self-sufficient communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that the first African farmers in southern Africa may have settled in modern-day Zambia and Zimbabwe before gradually spreading southwards into Africa. However, it is important to note that this is still an active area of research, and new evidence may emerge that challenges or refines this picture in the future. The early farming communities are believed to have had a deep respect for the land and its resources, and to have viewed it as a communal asset that should be managed and shared for the benefit of all. This is reflected in many of their cultural practices, such as the use of communal grazing lands, the rotation of crops to maintain soil fertility, and the use of fire as a tool to manage the landscape. At the same time, however, these communities also needed to secure their own access to land and resources in order to survive and succeed. This led to the development of a range of land ownership systems, including communal ownership, individual ownership, and land allocation systems based on family and social status. Over time, these land systems evolved. However, the primary belief in the importance of responsible and land care and communal ownership remained an important part of many African farming traditions in southern Africa. The first African farmers in southern Africa and the indigenous Khoisan people was complex and varied, and has been the subject of much study and debate among scholars. On the one hand, there is evidence suggesting some level of cultural and genetic exchange between the two groups. This suggests that there may have been some degree of interaction and exchange between the two groups. For example, studies have shown that some Bantu languages may have borrowed certain clicks and other sounds from Khoisan language. There is also archaeological evidence to suggest that two groups may have traded goods and technologies, with African farmers trading agricultural products and iron tools to Khoisan groups in exchange for animal products such as hides and horns. On the other hand, there is also evidence to suggest that the relationship between the two groups may often have been full of tension and conflict. It is believed that Khoisan groups were often marginalized and pushed onto less desirable lands by the expanding African farming communities. Clashes over resources such as water and grazing land happened regularly. The arrival of European colonial powers in the region in the 17th century further complicated the relationship between the two groups. Europeans often played different groups against each other to gain access to resources and establish control over the area. This led to the further forced relocation and social exclusion of the Khoisan people from their traditional lands and communities. This added to the ongoing social and economic inequalities that continue in the region today. Let's look at the questions for this comprehension. The first question says, who were the first African farmers to settle in southern Africa? What kind of crops did the early African farmers grow? What kind of animals did the early African farmers keep? What did the early African farmers think about the land and its resources? Did the early African farmers have their own way of owning land? Who were the indigenous people living in southern Africa before the arrival of the African farmers? What was the relationship like between the first African farmers and the indigenous Khoisan people? What happened when European colonial powers arrived in southern Africa?